My name is Lila Raptopoulos. I am the host of the FTWeekend podcast. We have a table over there if you want to say hi. We have some questions set up, kind of inspired by Esther Perel. I am thrilled to be introducing two of the clearest and most compelling communicators that I know, Esther Perel and Lucy Kellaway. Esther, I've been lucky to get to know over the years as a recurring guest on our podcast. She is a speaker, she's a best-selling author, she's a podcaster with her own show called Where Should We Begin? But fundamentally, she is a psychotherapist who has been giving clear language to complex psychological concepts and helping us understand ourselves better for years. One thing Esther often reminds us, which I love, is that we only exist in relation, that without relationships, we're nothing. She's taught us about sexuality and the erotic, about navigating work, about the importance of good questions, how we organize socially and culturally, how to love, how to date, and the unique pressures of doing all those things at this time. Lucy Kellaway, when I first started at the FT, I was in charge of reader comments, and our commenters, many of whom are probably here, are a smart, tough bunch. They don't suffer fools. And there was no one they loved more effusively and earnestly than Lucy. Lucy has held many roles through her esteemed career at the Financial Times, but she was especially well known for her satirical column about corporate guff. She really pushed us to say something when we were saying nothing, or say what we actually meant when we were trying to say something. In 2017, Lucy did something extremely cool, which was to leave her job and take one where people didn't know who she was, which was to become a secondary school math teacher. Now she's an economics teacher and has co-founded an organization called Now Teach to help successful people retrain as teachers. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce Lucy Kellaway and Esther Perel.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I want to start by telling you about the briefing conversation I had with Esther last week. So, like everyone else here, in fact, a few of you have already accosted her in the speaker's tent saying, can you give me some advice? I thought this would be a nice way of Esther giving me a little bit of free advice on stage. So I said one of the things that really interested me is how our relationships change as we get older, how what we want from them changes as we get older. Esther put on her, she's very smiley, but she's also quite severe, put on her best severe face on Zoom and said, no, the audience won't be interested in that. And she said, my audiences are, they're typically between mid-20s and mid-30s. They're not interested in any of that. So I said, have you ever met an FT reader? Particularly, have you met an FT reader with a spare, what did these tickets cost, 150 quid? They are not between 25 and 35. There are a couple of you in the audience who look like you're in that bracket. I said, no. The people who you will be talking to are, let's say, to put it charitably, kind of average age of 45. So Esther says, 45-year-olds, all the joy is gone. The joy is gone. And then she says, they have realized that the idea of equality in relationships is a sham. They're fed up with corporate life. And what was your other thing? Oh, yeah, and they're looking after their parents. So, Esther, can we begin where you and I left off? Shall we begin where you and I left off and ask you, why is life so rubbish for the 45-year-old?
My God. Anyone who came for hope? No, but what we continue to, I will never have a briefing thing again that I don't think it's been recorded. I think that if there's a part of our lives that has really changed massively, it is our relationship life. But it follows changes in society, in economy, in particularly secularization. And what I meant by they've realized that egalitarianism doesn't necessarily exist is that I think the discourses are often ahead of what people really experience on the inside. We often talk the way we would like to be and we would like to feel, but it's not necessarily what we actually feel and do. And when it comes to dynamics in relationships, that is often the case. So that's what I meant by we have realized that certain structures run deep, consciously and unconsciously inside of us. We tweak them a little bit, but we still live with a great deal of ambivalence about them. We find ourselves today no longer there and not yet here when it comes to big changes that have taken place. And what are the big changes? For most of history and for many parts of the world today, relationships are still organized around duty and obligation and a tribe and a community that gives you a sense of belonging, an identity, a sense of continuity, and you have a lot of clarity and you know exactly what you need to do, and many of the big decisions are made for you, but you have very little freedom and very little choice. And the West and the neoliberal societies and romanticism have created a system where we have choice like we've never had, and with that comes a tremendous amount of uncertainty and a tyranny of self-doubt and a lot of ache.
Doesn't sound great.
You pick. That's the big shift, and for why I said what I said. And relationships, as age advances, I mean, I'm older than you. Yes. You know, and that's a whole chapter on its own that actually is subsumed in the larger piece. So I didn't feel like going there.
But one of the things that you write about so brilliantly is how our expectations are sky high.
Yes.
And this, I imagine, applies to people of all ages. We expect so much from these relationships that we feel that we choose them. The longer we wait before we choose them, the higher our expectations are. Now, you give such really lovely advice to people. But don't you sometimes feel like slapping the entire human race and say, lower your blinking expectations?
No, I don't say lower them. I say diversify them. It's not the same. I think the expectations are what they are. But we came from a model where our intimate relationships, which were not necessarily even called intimate relationships. I'm going back about 60, 70 years. That's your parents, your grandparents, and some of us. So I'm not going back very far. You know, we came from what I like to call the production economy model of relationships and marriage. You know, sustainability, companionship, family life, children, social status. Then we added romanticism, affection, trust, intimacy, sexuality. We brought desire in to replace duty. Then we turned it into an identity economy. And we want you to help me become the best version of myself. And now we've gone yet another level up, which is that I want to also find you, my beloved, to be the one and only soulmate on this planet. And soulmate has always meant God. The one and only was the divine and not a human being. And when we want to experience ecstasy and wholeness and transcendence and meaning in this one relationship with this one person, as Robert Johnson, the analyst, says, we have collapsed the spiritual with the social. And when we ask one person to give us security, predictability, reliability, stability, dependency, and also adventure and mystery and unknown and discovery and excitement and passion and all of this, seriously, we're asking one person to give what a whole village should provide. So diversify.
But isn't it also, I mean, yeah. But we are setting ourselves up to be unhappy. We're setting ourselves up.
Well, let me put it this way. The research of Eli Finkel is actually very interesting. So we have a new Olympus. And when you climb the Olympus, the view is very beautiful and the air is very fresh. It's just that not many of us can climb the Olympus. So the good marriages or the good relationships, the good partnerships, however you want to call them, of today are often much richer and much better and more egalitarian and more satisfying than many relationships of the past. It's just that very few of us get there.
It does sound, on that note, as if you are one of the very few who has climbed Olympus. I don't know how many other people in the audience has, but you know, one of the things that you have written so brilliantly about is other people's messed up relationships. And, you know, in particular, if you think about what idea do you have of therapists in general? In my cliched view, the therapists are generally quite neurotic themselves, and they need to be quite neurotic in order to do their jobs brilliantly. So if you spend a lot of your time writing about...
I'm married to one too.
So double up
Double
there.
dose, imagine our kids.
Yeah. Well, we can discuss your kids in just a minute. But so you have written one of Esther's most brilliant books is The State of Affairs, which is about infidelity, which one way or another affects most of us. But you know, somebody who's close to us has been unfaithful. We've seen the fallout. But I look at the inscription to the book, and it's inscribed to your husband, who you've loved for 3 decades. So how does this work out?
So, I want to ask you a question, because you made a statement. How many of you would say that you have, don't raise your hands right away, that you have been affected by the experience of infidelity in your life? Either because you were the child of a parent who was unfaithful or left and fell in love with someone else, either because you are yourself the fruit of an illegitimate love, either because you have been one of the 3 protagonists, or because you are the friend on whose shoulders people are weeping on, or because you are the friend on whom somebody is confiding their newfound passion that they've never known before. How many of you have been affected by the experience of infidelity in your life? Okay. This is what I wanted to say, is that, you know, it's not just because one person has cheated on another. It's that there's something really systemic. Infidelity has lived in the shadow of committed relationships forever. I have a friend who just left her husband, and so I thought it's a good time to ask my husband, do you ever want a whole other life? You know, do you really want to try something completely different? And he answered me very nicely. He just said, today not, but in the past many times.
Did he say anything about the future, which might be relevant here?
The future was implied in today.
Marvelous. So that sounds like the absolute definition.
But I do remember a time when I don't talk often about us because I frankly don't think of myself as a model. I think that what I am about is to help people figure out what will work for them. And once you insert yourself in there, it's a mess. But I did one time remember that I think I said it in actually one of the TED Talks, that most of the people in the West today will have 2 or 3 adult relationships. And some of us will do it with the same person. That's probably what I did. You like it?
Yeah, I do like it, and I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you with, not exactly with an envy, but I'm looking at you thinking this is unusual to have those sequential relationships with the same person,
It demands that you take responsibility for your contribution to the mess and that you know how to change yourself without thinking that the only way you change your life is by changing partner. You know, I'm a couples therapist par excellence. People come to me, it's like a drop-off center. Yeah. You know, fix them.
Okay.
I'll explain to you what's wrong. I'll help you.
But it's more than a drop-off center because she's doing it in public as well as your private practice. And we're all listening.
How many of you know where should we begin? Just so I have a picture.
Yeah, obviously you know it. It's addictive listening. So there are 2 things about this. First of all, the podcast is absolutely brilliant. If you have led such a sheltered life that you've never listened to it, jolly well start listening.
Explain what it is.
Okay, so a couple comes to Esther. They know that they are going to be broadcast to millions of people around the world discussing their most intimate problems. Esther is so intelligent and lovely, teasing them out to tell us more and more. And then we cut away to her saying very sort of, you know, really sort of smart analytical things on your what you have taken away from that. She then brings the whole thing to a conclusion. So it feels like a sort of Sherlock Holmes mystery somehow. You start off with this problem and she brings it to a solution. So I've got lots of questions about this in abstract. First of all, why the hell would couples agree to do that?
If I told you that we have 6,000 couples for the next season?
6,000 suckers.
Or lucky ones, who knows?
Or, no, lucky ones to have the treatment, but seriously?
No, because you see, I think that for those of you who listen, you probably, well, I'll see what you think of what I say. When I started, nobody had ever heard it, so it was very difficult to find. It wasn't that difficult, but it wasn't the same, because I had to explain what I could imagine. I knew that what happens in my office is gripping, is so moving, is sometimes so despairing, it's sometimes so celebratory. Couples can create heaven and hell together at a level that is, it's the best theater in town. But I didn't want to work with patients. That is a no-no. Nobody of these people have ever been in my practice, nor will they ever be. And I have a 2-day practice that's very active. And once I found the fact that I could have the people apply to Audible, to Spotify, to whatever the distributors I'm with, it changed the whole thing. I didn't have to deal with the question of the Hippocratic Oath. I do follow the very same model, 3-hour sessions, which is what I often do when it's a one-time consultation. And nobody has ever seen them, because my team as well only hears them. But I did understand one thing. When you listen deeply to somebody else, you see yourself. When you watch other people, you project a ton on them. And so I didn't want to do TV, I didn't want to do the Showtime series, but I did want to do Where Should We Begin? And what happens when you listen in your ear is that you are feeling like you are behind the walls of the opposite couples. Now, in the old days, in the small town, everybody knew what was happening at the neighbor's house. You could hear every fight and you could hear every makeup. But these days, your friends can come and tell you that they're breaking up or divorcing and you never saw it coming. The degree of loneliness and isolation that couples have, the level of shame, the secrecy they live with, the stuff they won't tell the people that live right next to them, I get the chills sometimes. And I thought, if I can make people feel less alone, if I can help people have difficult conversations by listening to other people have difficult conversations, I'll create a public health policy for relationships that is free, affordable, and accessible worldwide, which psychotherapy most often is not. And that's what it was.
Okay, but is there a darker way? I mean, I applaud that, definitely applaud that, but as an ex-journalist and lifelong cynic, what concerns me is my own emotions as I listen. I am listening partly out of prurience. You know, it's theatre, you said. Yes, it's theatre, but it's real. And these are real people with really juicy problems. Is there something that's alarming about us kind of spying on the privacy and distress of others?
So I think it's a great question, but my sense is that the voyeurism is there because people want to know, but they also want to know, am I alone? Do other people go through this? That's what I've been trying to tell you. Then you have the people who listen to it in the car with somebody. Then you have the people who listen to it alone. Then you have the people who go and say you should listen to this after they've listened to it. So there's different experiences of listening. Sometimes people say, what a fucker, why don't you go after him or after them or whatever, but most of the time, I don't think it creates Schadenfreude only. Actually, I think it leaves people to see the complexity, the fact that things are not so simple, that it's so easy to be judgmental and to think we know what other people should do when we never have to live with the consequences of the decisions. And that's what I am willing to give more credit to the listener. Of course, there is a piece of it. How is he going to get that hard on, But okay.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not all hard-ons for Esther, because there's also, in parallel to Where Should We Begin?
For her pleasure.
There is also housework. And I was an office agony aunt. I used to write about office life, so this is particularly fascinating to me. But there's a great big piece in the FT on this today, which is saying that office life as we knew it is still, employers are trying to bring it back, but it's slightly refusing to come back, which in my view is the biggest disaster for relationships at work. I mean, I adored the office, and it's lovely being back here with FT people. It was absolutely the best thing, and it's failing to come back. So I wondered what you thought about working from home and all of this flexible working will have on relationships between colleagues at work. What are we losing?
So I think that, look, I thought until the pandemic that I was one of the last professions that happens face-to-face without any technology in an office with a whole set of rituals that participate in creating this atmosphere. The same time, same week, you go, you get the coffee, you bring the coffee to the therapist. This is whole thing around therapy. And then comes the pandemic, and overnight, practices swell. It's like everyone, needs. My supervision groups, we just really kind of banded together. There's a difference between working from home when you can't go out and working from home when you can choose what you want to do. So that's the first thing. In the beginning, for the entire 2 years, you could not, we couldn't enter, nobody was going to sit in a waiting room with somebody else. So I closed my office. Now, a therapist without an office is a little bit like a painter without an easel. It's very strange, Then you find ways. So there is the constant conversation amongst us therapists, and I know you didn't ask specifically about therapy, but, what do you gain and what do you lose from working, remote? I think that a certain age, and here I think the age factor and experience factor is very, very significant, can work more remote because they have retrofit. They have internalized. They have relationships that pre-exist. They have a sense of who to talk to. I had a kid whose last semester was COVID. His second day of school was 9/11, so he's nicely bookmarked. And then he began to look for a job. And in 10 minutes, he had to pretend that he knew more than he does in order to seduce people to give him another interview. And I just thought, how is this one going to learn any of this? I think it's worse for people starting out. I think what you lose is the serendipity, you lose the happenstance, you lose all the non-formality of relationships in the workplace, you lose meeting that person that suddenly finds an interest in you and becomes your mentor for life. You lose all the conversations, the fat that relationships live in. You open your screen, you may say 1, 2, 3 words to somebody, and then you get to the job, you get to the task, you don't spend too much time talking about the world, life, or anything, and then when you're done, you disappear. It's like this, and I think over time we are going to get a sense of what this does, which I don't think in 4 months since we really came out, we can already know.
And what will it do, is your best guess?
Well, one of the things it's doing, it's very interesting, right? On the one hand, people are less at work. Most people want hybrid. There's things that they think they really don't have to go to work for, and there are many things that they think really are better done. But it's really tough to be in an office where your day, there's only 4 people on this huge floor. I mean, it feels awful. It's like, why am I here? And there is no atmosphere, the energy of an office. That's if the office is a good place. Of course, there's a range of things. But at the same time as we are less absent, our expectations of the workplace have risen exponentially. We don't want a resource manager, we want a relationship manager. We want a leader that understands what it means to live in times of crisis and global uncertainty. We want somebody who understands that we are not interested in work balance, life balance. We're interested in integrating our personal life into our work life. And that means that I want my company to attend to my psychological needs, my well-being needs, my existential aches, and my needs for belonging, all the while I'm not there.
And so do you think, I really hope from the way you say that you think that these expectations are absolutely ridiculous, they're not achievable?
They're not ridiculous. They may not be achievable, but they actually are not ridiculous, because work and family are the only 2 hubs left. Since we don't have religion here, and we don't have the traditional social structures, and our institutions are crumbling, the only thing people have to give them that structure in life is their relationships and their work. And their relationships doesn't just mean their family relationships. I'm talking in the broad sense of how we live in relationships, so that we don't just think that love and commitments belongs to romantic love. It's not a crazy thing. It's so understandable. But
Okay,
the
it may be
manager, what does he or she, they know about your existential?
I mean, it may be understandable, but it's going to end in tears. It's going to end in tears because work and managers are not going to satisfy all of that. So it's going, you know.
So I think that here is the thing. And anybody who has had kids who struggle will understand the metaphor. Because basically what we're saying is, what is leadership in a time of crisis? Okay? And it is really about doing one thing, is not to try to provide answers for which you have none. So you hold. Like parents, the hardest thing is to see our kids not know something without stepping in there and telling them when in fact we're not sure at all. And the more complicated the situation, the less sure we are, and the more it can polarize in one direction or another, and typically we'll have one parent going in every direction. If you can hold, if the workplace actually does become a place where people can, you know, they always bring their whole self to work. This thing about people bringing, everybody brings their whole self to work, they just do it unconsciously. You know, they do bring their relationship history to work, and it influences the way that they work with others. But the structure of work today is a place where people, it's the only thing that gave us continuity in the last years of the pandemic, because people held on to their jobs or gave up their jobs, but it was both in both directions as the one thing that became a defining feature. And in that sense, the expectations themselves are understandable. The way people are going about it and what we demand today is, here's what it leads to. It leads to everybody having a new topic of conversation called the mental health crisis.
Okay, so mental health crisis. This is something, I'm a teacher now.
Yeah.
I really care about this.
Yeah.
My students...
I reject the concept.
Yeah, my students have learned about anxiety through TikTok. TikTok says that if you find yourself doing this, or if you zone out a bit, you have anxiety. This is making them miles worse. Miles worse. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so serious. So by talking about mental health without understanding anything about it, half the young people in the world have diagnosed themselves about having a disorder, and this is really, really a problem. First of all, do you agree with this? And what should we do with our young people to give them more resilience and jolly well toughen up? I know that's so un-PC, but I can see the average age is quite old here. And I don't think you're cancelling types, otherwise I know you would cancel me, but you know, whatever. Do I care?
Come here. All right. And what you described is before they've begun to take a host of meds.
Yeah.
So I think that the issue is, I'm always sensitive. This is just a way of saying it like that. I'm always sensitive when we pathologize individuals instead of understanding that our society may have some troubles. The mental health crisis is a way of individualizing social problems. You're not anxious, you're living exactly appropriately given the conditions of what you're going through in your life or in your family's life. That's very different. I just did a podcast episode that I hope to release soon. I'm doing a series now on families in the Ukraine. Couples that are living in war together and couples that are separated by the war. And so I just did this couple. She's in one country with her 16-year-old and he could not go, and he's in the Ukraine with their 18-year-old. And this is when you begin to talk resilience. So you listen, you hear. But so the mental health crisis is really, on the one hand, very useful because it makes a lot of people pay attention to something that wasn't looked at before. But on the other end, it's a deviation. It's a deflection. That's the word. It's a deflection. If people are depressed, if people feel despair, if people feel anxious, you need to be able to sit with them as parents and as teachers and as therapists about the job market, about the loneliness that they are feeling in the midst of many other people, about the effects of social media on their sense of self, about climate crisis, about the war, it's like this. If you talk about these things and you tell them we all are living, this is what I mean by the holding environment, leadership in a time of crisis. It's that you actually name it rather than looking at the symptoms. The symptom is just a response to something. And that something is more societal and more collective. We don't want to help our children to become more resilient. We want, as a collective, to understand that we have just gone through. My husband wrote this book called Collective Trauma, Collective Healing in 2013. There was no naming the word collective trauma. But the one thing that he understood way back then, this is almost 10 years ago, was that resilience is not a bunch of traits in an individual. Resilience is the ability to tap into the collective resources. And so in light of the big issues that are happening, we are dealing with a collective resilience. And if everybody goes at it alone, then we will be overwhelmed and depressed and school avoidant and phobic and OCD and. But if we create a thing together where we understand what we are, how we maintain hope and joy and love in the direst of circumstances, then we will not have a mental health crisis. We will have a world in crisis with people that are coping.
Could we have a little for that? Here.
I've never said this out loud.
What?
I've never said this out loud.
That's really, really...
I've never said this out loud.
Well, here. I wish you'd come and talk to my students. Anyway, before I open up for questions, just one little thing that I want to talk about. On sale in the tent is something that I consider to be dangerous. Esther has launched a game. In fact, I've had to move out of London that you can all play in your dinner parties. So I've moved 300 miles away where I don't have any friends. There's no danger of me being invited to a dinner party where someone has bought Esther's game. So the game, as I understand it, and Esther might interpret it differently, is that we all have kind of slightly boring conversations with each other. And so to sidetrack that, she's produced a game with a lot of cards that you can draw a card, and then at the dinner party you can tell people about your sexual fantasy or tell people about something you've never shared before. This sounds like my idea of total hell. Esther, you say it your way.
So the pink triangle cards are the sex cards, and if you play with your 8-year-olds or your colleagues, you just take them out.
Or me.
Yeah. With you, I'll only keep the gray ones.
Yeah.
I start soft.
Yeah.
It's the middle of the pandemic, and I'm missing dinner parties, and I miss basically being able to be curious without thinking that, for a long time, I don't know how it was here, but in New York for a while you would walk, and if a person came this way, you went like this, because everybody suddenly became a potential contaminant. And if you think that doesn't have an effect on us, it does. It's like it enters under your skin. And so I'm thinking, we're going to go out with social atrophy. Even those of us who will be happy to go back outside, some things we will have lost habit. And this wild ability to be just openly curious, I think this thing is where the curious minds meet, where you explore and discover people. So I thought, what can I create? And I thought I'll create a game. And I don't really know where it came from because I don't play games, I don't have card games, but I do remember things that my father would tell me when he would talk about his experiences in the concentration camp. And I understood that one of the most important things in times like this is humor. Everybody wants to talk about trauma-informed therapy. They should also talk about humor-informed therapy on occasion too, because they go together. And so I created this game. It's a game of stories because stories connect. Stories are bridges between us and people, and because relationships are stories. And you can play it at every level on a first date with your colleagues, with your children, and with the friends. And we did it last night with a bunch of people you probably know. And it's an incredible thing to tell stories that you don't even know where they come from.
So Esther, give me an example of one card in this pack that would be safe to ask me without me running for the door.
I had about 5 of them at the same time. A phone number I need to delete.
Oh, you see, I would answer that trivially. I've got loads of phone numbers of sort of old builders and things in my mobile phone, or people who
Yes,
have
see,
left town.
the game gets more complicated because we have little tokens, and so you can basically make it so that she doesn't answer that question and she goes to another one. So questions. The power in my family lies. A story I've told one too many times that isn't totally true.
I don't deny these are brilliant and fascinating questions. That's not the issue. I'm just saying I'd rather they weren't asked to me. So, on the subject of questions.
I won't say it.
On the subject of questions, we have 12 minutes exactly left. Now, I know there'll be 8 gazillion questions. Esther has told me that what she will do, she's not going to give you personal advice, so forget about it if that's what you want. We will collect a few questions all together. I don't think we've got time for the roaming mic, maybe we do. So you stand up and shout your questions. Once we've got a few questions, Esther will answer them together.
Here, list people. A question is a question, it's a statement, and it's not a paragraph with a question mark.
Okay, that's true, and it's got to be really brief. She's stricter than I am. Off you go.
There.
This one first. She's got the mic.
Go ahead.
What can we do to increase the religious content of society? Because you said that was a good thing.
Great. So anyone else with the mic?
Yeah, pink T-shirt. Yep. Can you stand up? Do you mind?
Yes, sure.
Great, thanks.
So I know a lot of people advocate going back into the workplace. I do as well. But can you explain how working remotely has kept a lot of people safe at home, knowing the challenges of abuse within the workplace, such as bullying or sexual harassment?
Thank you.
Great.
Another one here. Can we have a mic over here, man in the red shirt?
Glad you said red. Esther, could I have your phone number? Clinical advice only. There's a term we have in the West called irreconcilable differences. I'd love to know your definition of that, insofar as it means the point of no return in a relationship.
Right.
Is that enough so far, or do you want a few more?
I think so. I think we should, because I'm not writing them down.
Okay, so that's 3. So we had religion, we had going back to work, and we had irreconcilable differences.
I think that if you change the word religion to spirituality, you actually will have a much bigger tent. Simply because for a lot of people, that is the vocabulary of the moment. And it deals with 3 main questions. How do we deal with what is ununderstandable and unexplainable? Why do bad things happen to good people? And how do we deal with the question of suffering, which goes back to the question of going back to work? And what do we do with the questions of evil and morality and moral distress that many of us are experiencing? If you go back to the kind of more the cultural meaning of religion and you name it differently, the needs haven't changed. The technologies have changed and the vocabulary is shifting, but the fundamental human needs, I don't think have changed. Work. You know, if you were a young child and you said, I don't want to go to school, or I don't want to go to the playground, or I don't want to go because I'm not treated well, whatever the version of not treated well, I would hate to have to say to you, stay home, because that's the only place that is safe. I would go to the school, I would go to the place, and I would try to create an awareness on the collective level of what does the school do, what does this job do, this company do, to make it so that people can be here without having to be harassed, bullied, annoyed, shamed, ridiculed, etc. It's a terrible thing to think that you solve the problem by disappearing, because it just keeps the problem going on the next person after you. So my thing is, who can you reach out to that helps you get a voice at work with others, because you're not alone. It's just that when people are bullied or when people are marginalized, the system is so that everybody thinks it's just me. Then suddenly you find the 5 of, other, mysteriously hidden people. And from that place, you you create social change, and you can't do it alone, but you can't do it by retreating in your house. But I understand why you would. But if I'm your mom, I don't want you to be in your room the whole day.
And then we had irreconcilable
differences. I think it's very important that you understand one thing. Difference is never an issue. It's the way that people resonate with the difference. There are couples that are fundamentally different, but they are very well differentiated, and they can live very well with a little bit of similarity and communality and a lot of individuality and autonomy. Differences become irreconcilable when people are constantly reactive to why is the other person not like me. That's what makes them irreconcilable. It's the emotional crucible in which they take place, not the specific content. Some people can live with a huge pack of difference. Some people, it's like the princess and the pea. The slightest thing that is not shared creates havoc. So, but your question is a little different. I mean, I think one question is, what is the concept of difference in relationship? The other question is, when do I know when it's time to go? And how? And the third one underneath there is, what do I do when it's too good to leave, but too bad to stay? So these three live in each other's neighborhoods. Yes? Okay.
Great. Let's take 3 more. 3 seems to be the maximum number I can remember either. Okay, so woman over there.
Hi. So I wanted to ask you about the importance of
Mike, a little closer.
Hi, the importance of sex as you get older in your 70s and 80s in terms of intimacy and closeness. A lot of people, because of hormones,
Love it.
don't
Great.
feel like
So do
having
I.
it. But
Okay,
how
so-
important is it to create?
Okay, sex in your 70s and 80s, brilliant. Okay, woman in the front. Mike, woman in the front. Oh, okay, we've got someone here.
Love your work. I'm interested in your thoughts about bringing compassion and curiosity to addiction, to the problem of addiction.
Oh, great.
Great. Okay, let's have one more. Someone who's got a mic already.
Right there.
Okay,
there. Come forward. Move. Yep, there.
Yeah.
And then we'll see.
Hello, my question is, if we expect too much at the moment and we want the whole village in one person, then what should we reduce that to? What should be the minimum requirements?
Okay. All right.
Great questions.
Sex. Okay, let's talk a minute about sex. And I don't want to talk about sex 70s and 80s. I just want to talk about sex through the lifespan. But the first thing I really want to ask you when you ask this question, any of you, is what do you mean when you say sex? You know, what does that word imply for you? Are we talking about a kind of a heterosexual normative penis into vagina, we got it done, we both came, you know, that kind of thing? People have done sex for generations, and especially women, and have felt nothing. So I am never going to encourage you and tell you that it's important to do anything, even though Nike says just do it. You know, but I think that if you ask me, and this is what I wrote Mating in Captivity about, and this is what a lot of my work is about, is I am not so interested in what people are doing sexually speaking, but I am interested in the erotic, because the erotic is the poetics of sex. The erotic is what gives meaning to sex. The erotic is what makes you feel alive. The erotic is what makes this Ukrainian couple touch each other without touching and remain deeply intimate while they are in completely different countries. That's a different thing. Everybody knows the difference between a relationship that isn't dead and a relationship that is alive, between surviving and thriving. So to do the sex as the regular thing like that, it's not the point. The point is, what is pleasure, what is connection, and how do you like it? And do you have a relationship that allows it to change so that you can do harder or softer or frequently, more frequently or less frequently as you like? That's what I would like us to talk about when we talk about sex, rather than the doing sex, you know, approach. Because that stuff you can measure, and so people and scientists love it. But my thing is more mystical, and it is a much more, it's a different quality that is not nearly productive, that you can't measure, but when you feel it, you know it.
That was such a brilliant answer. It's thrown me off my stride. So I can only remember one of the other questions.
I do.
I can remember the last one. Can you remember number 2?
Number 2 was addiction, compassion and curiosity for addiction. I mean, the work of Gabor Mate is very important in that, for that question. I mean, the most important thing is shifting. Look, addiction has been defined primarily in terms of control and loss of control and lack of morals, etc., etc. Addiction treatment is a vast failure. Unfortunately, it's a vast failure and a huge money-making industry. And in the States, there are about 80 million people who struggle with addiction, and there may be 10% of them who get treatment. So it needs to be something very different. We do know the connection between addiction and early trauma. That is more and more clarified for us at this moment. And if you don't spend your time just looking at the symptoms, the loss of control, whatever the people are taking, then you can begin to elicit curiosity and compassion. But it depends which addiction you're talking. When I answer that question about the opioids epidemic, it's a different answer than am I talking about the heroin. You know, there's not one addiction, and there's not one kind of curiosity and compassion. But basically, the first thing that needs to happen is a change from the definition that every society has always had its leopards. And the addicts of today are the leopards of the past. You just push them aside. And then the next one was?
Was it on expectations? If you lower your expectations, which ones should you keep?
Listen, it's not about lowering them. I say it again.
Or losing a few. It wasn't about
It's about basically knowing that there are certain things you can have with a partner or partners, for those of you who live with more than one. There is a need for community, a need for many, many friends. Many couples lose their social connections. Most men in straight relationships lose their social connections. Their wives or girlfriends or female partners often become their minister of social affairs. The worst thing that can happen is when they divorce in their 60s, they are often completely alone. You need a circle. And that circle is intimate. It doesn't, and for some it's also sexual, but for others it's intimate. You need best friends. You need to maintain that whole thing around. You need to do things that you can't necessarily do in your relationship at certain stages because we want to reconcile two fundamental opposing human needs in these relationships today. I want security and adventure with the same person at the same time. That's a complicated thing. So you don't diminish your needs. You think about who needs to be here with us for that to take place. The nuclear family, I'm sorry to say, but it's a bit of a disaster. It's an overworked, overwhelmed system with two parents working with a lack of resources for which they have to pay way too much if they can afford it for these little schmurfs that are getting more attention than they ever got any time in history.
Okay, we're ending there on that negative note.
Okay.
Esther, that was amazing.
Listen, you two, you have definitely broken new ground for the Weekend Festival. This is the first time we've discussed sex at the Weekend Festival. Definitely the first time that the word penis and some other word you mentioned have been mentioned here. We will have a big post-event discussion as whether we go all in next year or not. But anyway, thank you both. Esther, you're brilliant. Lucy, wonderful.